Hello and welcome to a special installment of Liberty Nation's Swamponomics videocast. I'm Andrew Moran, Ellen's economics correspondent. Each week, I dive into the moors of top economic news stories and fish out compelling narratives, or I retrieve fallacies that have been accepted as conventional wisdom by the swamp creatures for years. This week, will China experience a baby boom or bust? The Chinese government recently announced that it would begin to allow married couples to have up to 3 children. Beijing had initially imposed a one-child policy in the 1970s in response to the significant population increase. The country had relaxed this ban and raised the number to 2 a few years ago. The economy is coming under pressure following the coronavirus pandemic. Society's aging population is rising. Population growth has slumped to a 7-year low, and the workforce is suffering from an intense labor shortage unseen since it became the world's second largest economy. Many are calling it a population crisis. As a result, policymakers have adjusted their birth limits. The government is hoping that its new incentives and social support programs, including education campaigns teaching young people about love and marriage, I guess people have never been married before, will be enough of an incentive to encourage child rearing. But are Chinese couples itching to have 3 children, or are households struggling to keep up with the 2 kids, senior parents, and high cost of living? To help us understand this big trouble in Little China, please welcome my guest at this time, Mr. Mark Angelides, Liberty Nation's managing editor who spent several years in the belly of the Red Dragon. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
So let's get started here. When you first read this story, what was your initial reaction as someone who lived in China?
Well, I guess my first thought was that there would be quite a lot of misrepresentation of this story through the regular media channels, because the one-child policy and then 2, it was never actually quite as cut and dried as it seemed, as we're told by the Western media. I mean, I lived in China for more than a decade, and I know a lot of people who had more than one child. And as with most things, it tends to be that the devil really is in the detail of it.
Many things about China are tight-lipped, so it's unclear what is true and what is false, as you just alluded to. There have been reports that the authorities did everything from forced abortions to slapping hefty fines on couples to limit the number of births. From your personal experience living in the country and your understanding of the central government, how serious did the authorities take its population rules?
Yeah, fairly seriously. But the thing is that, you see, those who work in it's all about the different market sectors within the country. So those who work in the rural communities, for example, would often have more than one child, especially if the first child is a daughter. Then they're perfectly allowed to have another child, because, of course, you know, in China it's very much a case of the boys are the little emperors. They're the better ones to have. So they could have another, or some people would register a second or a third child with a different family, whether that was with a family that didn't have a child who had lost a child. And of course, some would just keep that child under wraps, which means they don't have access to the schooling, things like that. Of course, the big one that nobody really talks about are the shou lao po, which means that the little wife, or the second wife, the unofficial wives. So what you find is in almost every second tier and certainly every first tier city, you have the wealthy businessmen, and they have their second families. So that they'll have the older model, which has their first child, then the invariably younger wife who will have their second or perhaps even third child. So the forced abortions, yes, the big fines, yes, they're all true, but it's not the entire picture of what happens there.
So how the first wives react to this, to the second wife?
Well, that's quite a cultural thing. In fact, some of them obviously do not know about it. Some of them know about it and keep quiet about it because they don't want to be divorced. That would be due to the laws and the cultural approbation that would come with that. They, you know, a lot of them just put up with it, and others, they actually have. Almost like, well, I know about them, I know them, you know, I'll look after the kids on occasion. So it's a very odd cultural distinction there. But yeah, you don't often find many women with second husbands. That's not really a thing. So it's perhaps a little bit unfair.
So if the country is desperate to boost its population, why not just remove the cap on children anyway?
Well, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that's because a volte-face of that kind would appear that it was the wrong policy to begin with. So by easing it rather than dismissing it, it appears more of I guess you'd call it, this was the next step that perhaps we planned all along, rather than a 180-degree turn, because they're very slow to admit wrongness. The Chinese government will admit to degrees of wrongness. For example, the big boss of China, Mao Zedong, it was originally you could never speak out against Mao. Everything that he did was correct. But then it started coming out from the party, from the central government, that, well, he was about 82% correct. And so in that 18% or whatever it was, a lot of sins could be covered. So they're very reluctant to do a complete, this was wrong, let's move on with something new. But they are very willing to say, this is the next step. So I suspect that's why it's this increase in the cap, rather than just saying, do what you want.
So do you think there will be a disparity in the demographics of people having children? From the reports I've seen, it's the wealthy people who will be taking advantage of this 3 children policy. I was reading an article, I think it was on CNN, sorry audience, but I was reading that this one woman, she was talking about, I have 2 kids and I'm pregnant with a 3rd, and now I'm pleased I don't have to pay this fine anymore, and I can work I can save more money for my job in finance. So are the poor people going to not have more kids there, or what are the demographics in China like?
So I think that's a pretty important question. I mean, the idea that this will be something that is a wealth driver, driven by the wealthy, that's pretty much right. If I might go off tangent a little bit on this.
Please.
So I think that we read a lot about worldwide about low fertility and falling birth rates, and then some people seem to jump to the answer that, well, we solve this through more immigration. But the facts don't really support that idea. I mean, I actually have the numbers roughly for this in the UK. Like in 2017, there were around 200,000 abortions, of which the vast majority were for women who were either married or in a stable relationship. So based on survey data, what we know is that people would like to have more kids. Only 5% in the most recent survey said that they wouldn't like any kids. Most would like 2, 3 or more. But it's the prohibitive cost of having children. So in the Western world, people don't have the amount of children they want because it costs so much money. It's like a 60% increase, I think, since early 2000s. So what this means is that either people who are very wealthy or people who rely on a welfare state have more children. Now in China, they don't have what we'd call that kind of very, very strong safety welfare net. There's no way that somebody could do what somebody in our countries can do, is they have a child, they get state benefits, and then think, well, I'll have another child and then I'll get more state benefits. That does not work there. So I think what we're going to see is that the people who are very, very wealthy will be taking advantage of this. And also the people who are, although not reliant on benefits, those who work in the agricultural sector, where local government really operates very much with a brown envelope economy. I think they will perhaps also take advantage of that. But the middle classes that are massively burgeoning in China and the rest of the world will not be able to, just because the cost of actually having a child is great. Sorry, a bit of a ramble there, but yeah, that's my theory on it.
That's what Swamponomics is all about. Go into great detail. So news outlets are citing users on Weibo, the Chinese alternative to Twitter, who are not exactly excited about this concept. One person said, quote, "It's mainly because I feel tired. How can I afford having a child when the pressure in life is so high?" An unofficial Xinhua poll of Weibo users also asked if they were ready for a 3rd child, and of the 30,000 responses, 90% said they were not considering. The results of the survey were removed almost immediately. So in the end, what happens if the population does not increase because of this? What is the solution for the government to employ? Would it be more migration, more social benefits? What could the ruling communists do to increase our population? How would they respond to this?
Well, I think that Weibo poll ties in quite well with what I said about how it's too damning through cost to do it. But if it doesn't work, you see, at the moment, well, how it has been for the last few decades is it's worked on a 4-to-1 policy. So that 4 grandparents will produce 2 children who'll produce 1. So, but what that does, that puts a lot of economic pressure on the one. But it also puts the hopes of the families, which is where you get the little emperor syndromes from. But in terms of what the Chinese government will do, my biggest expectation is that it won't come, whatever they do to deal with the falling labor force, won't come through immigration. It's at present and for the last couple of decades, it's been very, very difficult to get long-term visas that aren't tied to a specific work contract. Now, social benefits are a more likely solution, mostly because I think that'd be a very good public relations win for them to say that this particular Congress of the Communist ruling party has expanded social benefits because we care about the people of China. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of elderly, let's call them elderly nursing facilities open up, which are state operated, but with some private equity investment coming into that. Good market to get into if you can, but I would imagine that's the way it's going to go. It'll be a lot of nursing homes that will relieve some of the pressure that will be paid for partly by the state, partly by fees to the one child.
We should have stocks on the Shanghai Comps Index.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
So for years, globalists have championed China's one-child policy as something that more countries need to adopt because of the swelling population in the world. For a nation that's already one of the greatest polluters on the planet, do you think there'll be some pushback by international agencies or just the prominent globalists in general working to implement population control measures?
This is, I guess this is where I'm going to go down the rabbit hole a bit for you, Andrew.
Also, as a plug, he runs a podcast called The Rabbit Hole.
The Rabbit Hole, yes. So the globalist mindset, it's fraught with ideological paradoxes, and all problems must fall to the overall agenda. So while the one-child policy was praised as a masterstroke by some of the globalists as a great form of population control. But it seems to me that the end game always was globalism, unfettered immigration, reduce the localized birth rates, increase the costs of having children, add some generous welfare benefits in, open the borders, and then essentially you have to start managing from a global perspective. You need, with free movement, you need global taxation laws, you need a set level of regular laws, national laws that can operate for people shifting between borders. But yeah, I think to come back to the main point of this, I think that population control is really just looked at as another step in the long march towards the globalist order without going too far into that. So really, these steps aren't really surprising, and the fact that the globalists would support such a thing as the one-child policy was not a surprise at all.
So, China is not the only advanced economy witnessing population troubles. Across the globe, more young people are opting out of even starting a family, citing the astronomical expenses of having children. But this could have long-term consequences for every country, whether it is funding for social safety net programs or filling jobs. Earlier this year, it was warned that the United States could soon witness underpopulation and not overpopulation that many climate zealots had prognosticated. Could more bundles of joy be in the future of the world's largest economies? Or will millennials and Generation Z choose to adopt a pet, binge on Netflix, and rely on the developing world to make up for the gap in births? The next decade could be telling for America, China, and Europe. That's it for me this week. I'd like to thank my guest, Mr. Mark Angelides, who is the managing editor of Liberty Nation and host of The Rabbit Hole. Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
Please read my full Swamponomics column, where I dive deeper into some of the top economic and business stories in the United States and around the world.
Thank you.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.